On this prequel episode, we've got our Hunger Games fan reaction. We're learning about children's books and gender and previewing Hatchet. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We're in the middle of our summer series, and this prequel episode is going to be predominantly dominated by Hunger Games feedback, because you all had lots to say, and we're excited to hear everybody's feelings and opinions on the Hunger Games. So we're going to get right into our patron shoutouts right now. First up, we have a new patron. Not a new patron, but an upgrading patron. From the $5 level to the $15 Academy Award-winning level, we'd like to give a huge shout-out to V. Frank. Thank you very much, V. Frank, for upgrading your Patreon support. If you haven't already, do you know if they have recommended something?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I was going to say, if you haven't recommended something, make sure you do that, but it sounds like you may have already done so. It has been added to the list and will be done.
I believe they did. This was like 2 weeks ago. It was right after
right
we
after
recorded the
prequel
prequel for the Hunger Games.
Perfect. We'll be getting to that next year probably, but we will get to it. We have our everything scheduled out, so we'll get to it as soon as we can. And as always, we have our Academy Award winning patrons, and they are V. Frank, Prop Fund, somebody else potentially changing their name.
No, it's the same person.
Is it?
Yeah, it's the same person. They changed their name from upgrading to Fund Brian's prop fetish
to just Prop Fund.
To Prop Fund.
Interesting, because I feel like they were in a different place in the... Maybe they weren't. Were they not in a different place in the order?
They're always in the same order.
Okay. I guess that's what confused me. I thought they were somewhere else in the order. Never mind. Prop Fund, Ben Wilcox, Jeff Niederhofer, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Young, Scratch, Just Scratch, Selby Says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter, I kind of forgot that Jennifer Lawrence exists, and Alina Dolitkalova. Thank you all so much, as we always do. What's Jennifer Lawrence done lately? Anything? Like, what was her last big thing? She was probably in the most recent X-Men movie.
Yeah.
Like, there was what, Dark Phoenix came out like last
couple years
2 years ago.
I don't know.
I don't know if she's been anything major. I'm sure she's been in something smaller.
Yeah.
Probably, or like
I'm sure she doesn't need to work.
No, she also probably gets to work as much as she wants to. So that makes sense. I wanted to mention it here. I sent them a message on Patreon. I don't know if they ever responded, but I did get it. I listened to the opening arguments episode. Mm-hmm. When they do their Hall of Fame patron shout outs. After we had the one who said, I don't remember who it was, changed their name to, This Film Is Lit is my favorite podcast. I have to change this before OA records. And they did not get it changed in time. And they read it on opening arguments, and it made me chuckle. They laughed at it, but I enjoyed it very much. So thank you. Again, I can't remember. Is that Prop Fund? I don't know.
No, I think it was the person who always changes their name.
Okay, perfect. Well, we appreciate it. I got a laugh out of it listening to opening arguments. All right, we've got a big old lineup of listener feedback, so let's get to our fan poll follow-up for The Hunger Games.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Well, you guys really came through for us this week.
Yes.
Tons of votes.
So many votes. I actually think
a lot for us.
The most votes we've ever gotten, right?
Yeah, I think it is
the most
votes we've ever gotten.
I would have figured Twilight might have... Because
I don't know.
Our listenership hasn't gotten a whole lot larger since we did Twilight. I don't think, at least. I could be wrong. But the numbers-wise, it looks like it's around the same size listenership since Twilight. And so I'm surprised that...
Well, we got quite a few more votes on Twitter than usual, so I'm wondering if maybe
somehow it got caught in a weird algorithm or something.
Yeah, a weird algorithm, and more people saw it than usual.
Yeah, who knows? But we got lots of votes and lots of feedback, so let's get into it.
So on Patreon, we had 9 votes for the book and 0 for the movie.
Mm-hmm. That will be a trend.
Ian from Wine Country said, I loved the movie. Lawrence killed it as Katniss. Peeta and Gale, meh. As you called out, PETA's camouflage was comical. I'm choosing the book because the first book was so good, it made me read the entire trilogy over one weekend while watching playoff football with my crush. I haven't read a book that made me ignore life like that since I stayed up literally all night reading Jurassic Park when I was 12.
There you go. That's fun.
Love to hear that about books.
But they still voted for the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Yeah. But because that was one of the things I would be interested to see, and maybe we can do a separate follow-up poll. Ian did provide this feedback, at least saying, I loved the movie. Mm-hmm. I would be interested to see, because everybody voted for not everybody, but spoilers. A lot of people most people voted for the book. But I have a feeling that in general, this is a more enjoyed adaptation than some of the other ones.
Yeah, I think it was
even though the book ran away with it.
Yeah, yes. I think it was a trend from what I noticed that people were saying like, well, I really liked the movie, but I just liked the book more.
Yeah. Well, we can just let them say that I jumped the gun on this, but that was something I noticed too, and I thought it was really interesting.
Scorch Pilot Vinny said, "Okay, I chose the book, but I want to talk about the computer scene in the movie. This might not be the movie's intention, but I kind of thought, what if that information is wrong on purpose, so someone would die due to the berries?"
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I like that idea. I think it runs a little counter to the general premise, at least portrayed in the... I don't know how much it's alluded to in the movie, in terms of the fact that the game makers generally don't want the people dying from eating the wrong thing or boring stuff, shall we say. Generally, even though they do mention in the book that a lot of people do die of hunger and dehydration and cold or, exposure.
I mean, it's called The Hunger Games.
Yes, and exposure and whatnot every year. But generally, they prefer, the combat stuff.
Right.
Because it's more exciting. So it seems runs a little counter to that, the idea that they would do that so that somebody died of the poison. But it's still, I do like the idea that they are somehow... Because them manipulating it is obviously a big component and theme of, them controlling sort of the outcome of these games, and that's just another way they would do that. It's a fun idea.
Yeah. And that scene, we talked about it, and I think you probably are right that it was just kind of an error on the filmmaker's part. Yeah. But I do think, I like it because I think it allows for a bunch of different interpretations of what happened.
And it's also a fun little scene because... it's one of those things that if it was anybody else, it wouldn't really be interesting. Mm-hmm. It would just be a little throwaway scene in the montage. And it is that for 90% of people. Even people that read the book, I would bet most people don't pay attention to that specific moment. I don't want to say most, but a lot of people probably. I know the first time I saw the movie, I'm sure I wouldn't have noticed that little detail. But it is one of those things that is for people who have read the book a bunch of times or paying really close attention. It is kind of a little weird Easter egg that's kind of fun. So
Over on Facebook, we had 6 votes for the book and 0 for the movie. Sarah said, "This is the first time I waited to watch a movie until I read the book, and I'm so glad I did. The book had so much more nitty-gritty that really drew you into the story. The love triangle, #Team Gale, the weirdness of the Capitol, the brutality in the games, etc. I admit that the movie tried its best to get as many world details in as it could, but I would have been confused had I not read the book first. The book also allows you to have emotions and grow attachments to the other tributes. I remember my heart hurting a lot after reading Rue's death. I remember reading how scary the careers actually were, and I remember being sad about Foxface's death. The movie had to move so fast that you never really get to have those attachments, which is one thing that makes the games feel even more brutal. I feel like since the book was from Katniss's perspective and we heard her thoughts and opinions, we were able to see her and appreciate her dynamic personality and really feel for her with all she's had to overcome in life. I feel like movie Katniss just seems like an empty shell with some aggression issues that just happens to know how to survive. I do love how we get to see scenes from the game makers and others in the movie, but I miss the interesting character that Katniss actually is."
Yep. Agree a lot with that. A lot of echoes a lot of things we said over the course of the episode, for sure.
Adam said, I think being able to hear Katniss's thoughts added a lot to the book that the movie just wasn't able to get across, so I voted book. I remember Katniss coming across as some combination of ace, arrow, and autistic when I read it, although I'm autistic and might just be projecting, and felt like the movie denied that and tried to play up the love triangle / romantic angle more. Honestly, I think book Katniss had a stronger emotional, potentially romantic connection to Madge than she did Peeta.
I mean, we stand Katniss Madge, but no. No, that's I read this comment when they posted it, and I thought it was really interesting because that was something that I got a lot this time reading it. Specifically the angle of Katniss being coming across as autistic. I turned to you one time as I was reading it, and I was like, I think Katniss might be autistic. Like, it might be the intended characterization that's supposed to be coming across here, which is not something that even remotely crossed my mind when I read this book 10 years ago when it came out. So I thought that was really interesting. I will say, in regards to at least her being potentially autistic, I think the movie, I will agree that he said that the movie denied that, and I don't know if the movie denies that necessarily, because I think the characterization of Katniss feels very similar to me in the movie as it does in the book, and like she's playing Katniss very similarly to how I imagined her acting in the book. But obviously, since you're not in her head, it's hard to, because the things that really make the fact that she might be autistic come across in the book are the way she parses interactions with people, and the way, at least that was how it came across to me. There was a scene in particular where she realizes way after the fact that somebody had the motivations for somebody doing something was just that they were being nice. Like that was all it was. And just the way she kind of parses through interactions with other people. Again, you don't get that her going through that in her head in the movie, but I think in terms of the portrayal of Katniss as a character, the movie version tracked on pretty 1-to-1 to the book to me. So I think that could still be there, but obviously you just have less information to make that assessment in the movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know if it's so much that the movie denied any of those readings as it is that we're not in her head, like you said, or like Sarah said, that the movie is just having to move so fast that we get less moments for that kind of characterization. Yeah, that would be my reading on it, and especially since I had never seen so I'd seen the first movie before we watched this one again, but I've never seen any of the sequels, so I don't know where any of that goes, and I don't remember reading them at all. But so I'm interested to see how that moves forward, if it continues or if they take any of those readings, because Adam is not alone in mentioning reading Katniss as ace. Right. So. Katniss as asexual, aromantic, and Katniss as neurodivergent are, I think, pretty common readings of the character. And we didn't get to talk about it. We'll talk about it a little bit during all of our feedback, but we didn't really get to talk about that during our episode.
At least not directly, necessarily,
for a couple different reasons, but that is something that I would like to explore a little bit further as we move forward with this series, because I think that all of those are well supported by the text.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, to me, the autistic thing came across, and I Googled it immediately after I got that vibe, and I was like, oh, this is a pretty common reading. Like she started, I Googled is Katniss autistic or something like that. And tons of lists coming up of top 20 autistic character, those kind of BuzzFeed style lists of that sort of thing. And she was on a lot of those kind of lists, and there was a lot of Reddit posts about it. And so it was very, in particular, the autistic thing. But I think, and so, and then I think her reading as asexual or aromantic is also something that has a lot of support in those communities, and is something that people see a lot in the character. And it's that, like you mentioned, is something we want to talk about more and will talk about more. We didn't touch on it a bunch, partially because, like you said, for a lot of reasons. I think partially it's because it's something that both of us are trying to educate ourselves on in terms of those perspectives.
I didn't have time to educate myself on any of those perspectives as much as I would have liked to before discussing it.
Yeah, so we don't want to barge into, go steamrolling into a conversation about those topics, without having any sort of grounding in it ahead of time, so that we don't sound like idiots. But yeah.
Well, and I wouldn't want to talk over anybody either.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Well, anyway, that's the when I say sound like idiots, I mean by talking over. Yes, that was
talking, speaking out of turn.
Yes, that was what I meant by that.
So on Twitter, we had 20 votes for the book and 3 for the movie.
A few people voted for the movie.
Yeah, we finally got some movie votes on Twitter. April Edmansky said, the movie was a close adaptation, but I have 2 nitpicks. The end fight was confusingly shot, and Peeta and Kato look too much alike. Can't you give one of them slightly different hair, like light brown maybe? And the dogs looked like cartoons. Also, we laughed our asses off at Rockface Peeta, watched it multiple times.
It is a great moment. It is a very funny and ridiculous moment. I'm glad everybody else found that as ridiculous and enjoyable as we did. I don't disagree about the fight at the end. In my memory, I don't recall it being particularly confusing, but it is at night and it's dark and they do look
tussling.
Alike. It's a lot of just a lot of teenage boy with short blonde hair wrestling about. So it's.
What didn't you say in our last prequel? Wasn't the actor who played Kato? Didn't he also audition for either? He
auditioned for Peeta. Yes, that is true. So I forgot about that. Yes, that is fair. The actor, and I can't remember his name now, who plays Kato, did audition for Peeta and didn't get the role. So he ended up getting the Kato role, and also eventually Bjorn Ironside in Vikings.
Andy Best said, film's fine, but...
No. Andy Best said, film fine.
Film fine. But without those book details, it becomes PG-13 Battle Royale. With the book details, it has its own insight and was surprisingly good, considering it's not Ballard or whatevs.
There you go. Film fine. I think it's the summary of that one. I haven't seen Battle Royale. We did mention that in the prequel episode. The similarities and stuff. It's a very similar style of story, at least. We were confused at first about what it's not Ballard or whatever, and did some quick Googling and found that Ballard was a sci-fi, just specifically wrote a lot about dystopian fiction. And so I think they're comparing, kind of contrasting to that and saying it's pretty good considering it's not this, it's like saying something is good for good sci-fi, even though it's not like PKD or something like that, I guess is what they were going for.
Kelly Napier said, I picked the book because the world building is better. That being said, if there was ever a book just screaming for a map at the front, this would have been it. If you're going to tell us the former United States has been carved up into districts after a catastrophic event, then you need to show us
violently nodding my head along with this right now.
We all know what the U.S. looks like on a map. It's not a fictional geographic place. If you Google Hunger Games district map, you'll see that this has led to confusion about where the borders actually are. The biggest discrepancy seems to be where the capital sits. I saw examples from LA to Utah after just a quick search. A similar example of using current geography on a fictional world is Divergent, but she makes it pretty clear that it's Chicago and only Chicago, so it doesn't incur the need, in my mind, to see where we're based. To conclude, the books are decent YA dystopian fare. A reference map would have made the world building even better. As a person with a visual medium work background, I'm drawn to see, don't say.
I violently nodding my head in the sense that it seems mind-blowing to me that there wasn't
that
anybody in any of the process was like, hey, maybe this should have a map.
I almost wonder.
It's a dystopian spot that takes place.
Here's my theory. I wonder if moving forward after the first book, she didn't know exactly where she was going with the story yet. Yeah. And they didn't want to be nailed down.
Want to hem anything in.
Yeah.
Like, because there's some extra district or something somewhere or something weird like that. That could be if they want, but still, you could come up with Canada could have or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. You just draw the map.
Where is
with the
Canada
districts.
and all this? That's a good question.
Yeah, did all of
Where
Canada
is
get
Canada?
wiped out? Where's the rest of the world? Like, with all this, that is a failing a little bit of the series that, from my memory, I don't remember if any of that's ever addressed in the future books. It may be, and I may be misremembering. But it's like, what? Okay, we have all this future tech. Like they got hovercrafts and they can fly around the wire. Where there's no intercontinental travel, or is the rest of the world dead? Like what's going on? I don't know. It's very interesting.
I mean, honestly, I wouldn't blame the rest of the world if they were just like, you know what, we're just gonna let America just be America over here.
Yeah,
and like.
Well, I think what would have been interesting if, and maybe this would have been it, but then because it could have even created a more interesting world, is if. Like world building experience is if there was the climate crisis and then that spurred some sort of like nuclear war or something, and the rest of the world, like US, like wiped out maybe, and what I mean is didn't wipe out everybody, but basically made the rest of the world essentially uninhabitable. But then a lot of the people from other continents and whatever made their way eventually to the U.S. because it's the only inhabitable part. And then our society, this Pan Am society is multicultural.
Out of that,
yes, and it's like multicultural, more like Firefly or something. Where there's like there's different cultures and stuff intermingling, and the languages have sort of intermingled in a weird way. Where it seems in this that we're pretty explicitly just like Americans is what that are in this story, or future Americans, I guess. But I think that could have been interesting, and it also would have. And again, without knowing what happens and remembering what happens in future books, that could have plugged that sort of that lingering question of like what's going on everywhere else. And that wouldn't be an issue if we didn't have all this technology that would allow us to easily travel to other places. So I don't know.
I also would not be at all surprised if sometime in the next few years we get like anniversary editions of the books that do have maps. Yeah. I would not be surprised by that at all.
Well, the 10th anniversary already passed, so
right, but
it would have to be a few. Yeah,
I'm just surprised that the 20th.
Because I mean, I did a quick Google too when I read that to see, and there's no official map.
Yeah.
Like so there hasn't,
which is wild.
In the 10th anniversary or whatever, there wasn't. I assume there was a 10th anniversary edition. There was not a map in it or anything, which is mind blowing to me. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different maps, and a lot of them are very similar, and they are more what I expected, where they're more like regional kind of, and like like the Northwest is one, California is a district, like that kind of thing.
Shelby Suderman said, "This one ended up being close for me because of the messaging that was cut, but in the end, there's been a lot of discussion over the years about about Katniss reading as an aromantic asexual. I don't know if you're planning to cover it at some point, but I'll just go over a couple of quick examples. Katniss never describes or is preoccupied with being attracted to Gale or Peeta. When she kisses someone, it's motivated by what she thinks she should do in the situation. Attraction has nothing to do with who she ends up with or why. But beyond that, what really struck me this time about the book is how much the pageantry aspect feels like an allegory for what it is to be an inexperienced aspec teen taken from an environment where she knows herself and suddenly having this allonormative narrative pushed onto her from everyone. The adults, including the ones we like and trust, are telling her it's fine. Just go along with it. This is a good thing and she should be grateful. Fake it till you make it. Trust us, you don't understand yet, but we know better than you. She's given no opportunity to figure out what she wants on her own terms, only the expectation of what she's supposed to do. Here's what really turned me off the books after I initially read the first one. With all of that, there's some serious coercive undertones to the Katniss-Peeta relationship in book 1 that really rubs me the wrong way. Now, I get that Peeta was forced to participate in the Hunger Games by the Capitol. I get that this is to keep them both alive. I get that he's sincere about his feelings for Katniss. But also, he and their team put together this narrative about them being star-crossed lovers without including her, and then sprung it on her in front of the whole country. I get that they thought it wouldn't matter because only one of them was allowed to live. But then they're both allowed to live. I struggle through that last section of the book where she finds PETA every time because not only does she just have to play along for their lives, but we, the audience, know PETA was sincere, and now there's this expectation on her that just feels really gross to me. As someone who was a confused A-spec teen, knowing there were expectations but not why or how I was supposed to deal with them, boy does that hit close to home. I don't know how much of this Suzanne Collins intended or how much of it just worked out that way. If she intended to say this, it doesn't come across to general audiences, so I'm just left with this section that feels too real but ultimately drops the ball by not actually saying anything about it. It's just brushed off at the end. I don't really remember catching fire of the book, but I think it's very slightly acknowledged. I'll have to read it again to see. To me, this reads different in the movie. There's much less time spent in the cave, and those scenes are much closer to her previous reaction, so it feels more like movie PETA could know she was faking it to keep them alive, and I don't feel that same expectation the way I do in the book. To me, the movie is better because it doesn't have all that extra baggage that's just brushed off anyway. Plus, I'm not so put off by Book 1 PETA that I'm distracted from the point Suzanne Collins is making with the rest of it. Although, to be fair, I think the sequels do a better job with Katniss and PETA's relationship because it's allowed to grow organically. Also, I love the cast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was really fascinating. I read that when Shelby posted that 28 tweet.
It was a very long tweet thread, yes.
On our Twitter. And I found it was very interesting, and I was hoping that Shelby would chime in on this because it was, one of the reasons that I thought that it would be good for us to discuss it after Shelby had a chance to chime in because she has the perspective that we don't. I will say that this reading, at one point Shelby said that I don't know how much of this Suzanne Collins intended or how much of it just worked out the way. If she intended to say this, it doesn't come across to general audiences. I don't know if it doesn't. I got it this time for sure. But it depends on what you mean by come across to general audiences, I guess, because I think it would come across in the book to general audiences who were aware that Ace and Arrow was like a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's people who are more, who have existed in the culture in a place where they are at least aware of the conversation, of people that exist that are asexual, aromantic, etc. I think it then becomes a very easy to notice reading. I think if you're reading it without that frame of reference, then yes, you have nowhere to ground it. So it's
I think it would definitely be easier for someone who is not Ace or Arrow, but is aware of asexuality and aromanticism,
I guess. That's the way to say it.
To get that reading. But definitely, if you're not even aware of that, or even if you just have some kind of passing awareness, you're probably not gonna get it from this. I mean, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, I guess that was my point. But I do think it is one of those things that does feel. I will say the thing that I found super interesting too was the initial just reading of Katniss as Ace or Arrow or both seemed fairly obvious upon reading it this time. Felt fairly that totally tracks, and wasn't a revelation to me upon reading any of this Shelby's comment here. What was really interesting that I thought is a layer deeper, that is a very fascinating read of it, is the pageantry of it all, and that being an allegory for
I think that's really fascinating.
Allonormativity, I guess is the right word, right? I think trying to get my terms correct, that element of it, the being at the top there, the struggling with how much the pageantry aspect feels like an allegory for what it is to be an inexperienced A-spec teen taken from an environment where she knows herself and suddenly having this allonormative narrative pushed onto her by everybody. I thought that was really interesting and was a really like nuanced reading of it that I hadn't thought of reading it. Like, even though like this time reading it, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see reading her as Ace or Arrow. But that secondary allegory of it was, not something on my radar. But upon hearing Shelby talk about it, makes perfect sense and is a really interesting read on it. And it seems like it's probably wasn't Suzanne Collins' intent. I don't know though. I've never heard any interviews with her. I don't know like what her background, like what her deal
I'm
is.
not sure because it's interesting because it does feel like it almost would have had to have been intentional,
right?
But then there's not, at least according to Shelby. I haven't read the other two books yet, but it sounds like there's not much done with it.
I will say that so like I said a million times, I remember so very little. I do remember finding the way the romantic subplot finished essentially by the end of the third book to be frustrating and disappointing. Okay. And I do wonder now I'm going to be very interested when I read it when I was 20 or whatever. And and at the time I had zero inkling of what like any of these things, like, right. I wouldn't have had any frame of reference for any of that kind of reading of it. I would be really interested to see upon this reading if my perspective coming to it as a, good Lord, the terms. I am bad at this. I'm trying. What is the allosexual? I guess is the right word. If that was what was coloring my viewing of, and what made me feel frustrated with and again, I don't remember why. I just remember the feeling of being like, I don't like this ending. I don't like how this ended. This all feels weird and wrong. Okay. And so I'm wondering but I don't remember the details of it at all. And so I'm wondering if
how much of that was colored
by my expectations as an allosexual person who wanted a more traditional type of
ending.
Yeah, like allonormative ending. I want I don't know. And right. I was thrusting that onto Katniss maybe why don't you just do this thing that to me feels normal? You know what I mean? Yeah. And but not understanding that if that is the intent for her character, that's me, sort of trying to put this weird framework on her character. That may be what's going. I don't know. Again, zero memory.
I think that'll
really
be interesting. I mean, even though you don't remember the particular details, but knowing that you felt that way about it the first time you read them a decade plus ago, but now that you have expanded your framework and have a more of an understanding of
the spectrum of sexuality and human experience and whatnot. Yeah.
If you can get a different read on it.
Yeah, I would be, like I said, I'm very interested.
I mean, I'm sure you will get a different read on it.
Yes.
If just by virtue of it being a decade plus later.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Anyways. Super fascinating. Super thankful that you wrote that all out for us, Shelby. We appreciate you always commenting on our stuff, but
we appreciate you taking the time to educate
us.
On Instagram, we had 15 votes for the book and 4 for the movie. We also got a handful more votes on our Instagram poll than we usually get, although I'm not sure. Maybe this book just caught people's attention more because I haven't been doing the story poll for very long. Anyway, 15 votes for the book, 4 for the movie. Jamie_0214 replied to the story where I ask the question and I say reply and let us know why you liked one or the other more. Yes. And this person replied and just said snobbery.
Yes.
And they voted for the book, so I'm assuming this is a book snob
thing.
Joke.
Yeah, a joke. Yeah. I saw that. And I was like, what does this mean? Because I just saw the message. Literally just said snobbery because I got it through Facebook Messenger or whatever, even though it was on Instagram because they're the same thing. And I was like, what is? And then I was like, oh, okay. I saw that it was a response to the poll, and then it was all made clear.
Yeah, I don't believe they were calling us snobs.
That's what at first I was like, wait, what did we do? feel like we're not very snobby.
Try very hard not to be snobby. Yeah. And Jedianne9 said, it's fun getting to see some of the visuals in the movie, but Colin's writing is so descriptive and strong that I get way more out of the book. She really puts you right in District 12 with Katniss at the beginning, and then masterfully transports you to the arena in a way that feels a little disconnected in the movie. One more thing. Since I read the book before casting was even announced, I had someone completely different in my head as Peeta. It's the only time I've ever been kind of bummed about a movie's casting.
Interesting. The only time. That's surprising. More than being bummed about it is that it's the only time.
I remember, I'm sure we talked about this last summer. I was very bummed about the Twilight casting when they first announced that.
I think we talked about it in the prequel episode or something for the first one. But yeah. That is, yeah. I'm assuming when they say I had someone completely different in my head, they mean generally, like just like. But if you had a specific example, I'd like to know who. Yeah,
if this was like a specific actor,
someone, or if it just
please
was more
let
like
us know.
A vague like image of someone.
Yeah, and then Josh Hutcherson just didn't fit that image. Let us know either way.
Either way, but if it's specific, definitely if it's a specific actor, I want to know who your dream Peeta is. Because that would be interesting. So. All right, what was our final breakdown for the votes?
So our final winner was the book with 50 votes to the movie's 7.
Shellacking.
It was a little bit of a landslide.
Movie got trounced.
I'm a little surprised.
This is what I said earlier. I'm not surprised.
I figured the book would win.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that the book came out on top. I'm surprised that the movie didn't do a little better.
I think it's a lot, and this is what we started talking about earlier. I think it's probably a lot of what my opinion was. I'm not going to try to universalize my opinion, but I have a feeling that it's a lot of people felt, and based on the comments, a lot of them said similar things to how I felt, which was, it's pretty close. Like, I'm teetering to the book, but only, in a handful of ways. And the movie is a pretty good adaptation.
It's a pretty good adaptation.
Like, it's quite good. And if I were a big Hunger Games fan, or a bigger Hunger Games fan than I guess I am or whatever, I could see being very happy with the movie.
I mean, and especially given how bad an adaptation can go.
Yes.
Especially when you're a big fan of a book. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a great adaptation.
Yeah, and overall,
we're pleased with it.
Pretty solid. Pretty solid. All right, it is time to learn a little bit about children's books and gender.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
So we're talking about Hatchet this week.
One of my favorite books as a child.
A childhood favorite of yours.
Yep.
Now, I didn't read Hatchet as a kid. I'm not really sure how I missed it, especially since it was a Newbery honor, and I read a bunch of Newbery books as a kid. But I was aware of what the premise of it was. So a couple years ago, like before we even started this podcast, when you told me that it was one of your favorites when you were a kid, I asked you if you had read Island of the Blue Dolphins or Julie of the Wolves. And I was summarily astonished that you had not, because they're also wilderness survival adventure stories that should have been right up your alley.
And to expand on that, it wasn't just Hatchet. I was a big fan of, I read all the sequels except for Brian's Journey, which we'll get to. It was like the last one or whatever. I read like all the sequels. There a handful of other books, specifically one of my favorites that I also reread a bunch that I liked about as much as Hatchet was one called My Side of the Mountain. And I believe it also has a sequel called The Other Side of the Mountain. I read both of those quite a few times. I may even like My Side of the Mountain more because he has a pet hawk in that one, or falcon. I think it's peregrine falcon. He becomes like a falconer, and and that one also has super cool drawings of like his survival stuff, like little like it's really cool. It's a great book, but from my memory, very similar to Hatchet. I did like survival books as a kid, like those style of survival books.
This was a genre that you were into.
And I also, and I'll mention it later, I also read quite a few other Gary Paulson books that are similarly survival type stories, like Dog Song, like Transall Saga, like Canyons. Those are also similar survival stories. So it was a genre that I read quite a lot as a kid.
Right. And when it became clear to me that this was a genre that you had read quite a bit as a kid, like I said, I proceeded to be summarily astonished because Island of the Blue Dolphins and Julie of the Wolves, I read both of those as a child, and they're the same premise. Mm-hmm. It's like a kid finds themselves abandoned somewhere in the wilderness and has to survive by their wits and their skills.
Yeah.
So when we came back around to Hatchet for that episode, I started thinking about that conversation that we had years ago. And I did make you read Island of the Blue Dolphins.
And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. That was very good. Yeah, I would have loved it as a kid.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I started thinking about that conversation, and I started thinking about books and childhood and the way that children's books get divided according to gender. That is to say, divided into two distinct groups according to the gender binary.
Yeah.
Boy books and girl books. And I'm going to use boy and girl a lot during this discussion.
And also,
And I'm talking about the concept of the gender binary. I'm not intentionally leaving out non-binary people.
As created by society.
Yes, as created
by
society,
not as endorsed by us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyone who I think has a passing bit of awareness knows that gendering products is not uncommon.
I don't think I've ever seen a single gendered product in my life. I don't know what you're talking about.
But why do we do it? So I'll start out talking about toys. So in the case of toys, the reason that we gender those products is literally because of capitalism. I'm not even joking.
I mean, that's an underlying answer to a lot of questions, but yes.
So toys actually were not always marketed according to the gender binary. But around the 1940s, toys became an industry. They became a big business. And manufacturers then caught on to the idea that at least wealthier families would buy an entire new set of the same products if those products were marketed differently for both genders. And why would you be satisfied with selling a family one toy for their kids to share when you could sell them a blue one for their son and a pink one for their daughter?
I mean, that's just good AdSense. That's just good marketing. Like, if I had existed in 1940, I would have been the person making the fucking advertisement selling the boy version of. Anyway.
Now with books, I think it is a little more complicated, interesting, and hung up in the persistent stereotypes about each of these genders. Historically, the marketplace for literature in general has skewed female. Books...
You say historically, there's like since a certain period.
Yeah, since a certain period.
Since like, who knows when, but like, probably like the...
I wouldn't even...
Late 1800s, maybe in that ballpark?
Yeah.
At least in the West.
At least in the West,
world,
around the time of the advent of the novel.
Yeah.
Especially.
Because obviously before that it skewed almost exclusively male, but in lots of places in the world.
Yeah, the marketplace for literature skews female.
Yes.
Books, especially fiction, are a girl thing. And we can see that reflected in popular characters whose primary traits are that they are readers.
Yep.
Characters like Hermione Granger or Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Can you think of any similar male characters who are primarily defined by the fact that they like to read?
Yeah. Oh boy, I'm gonna try to think. Yes, they exist. They're generally not main characters. I'm trying to think of a main character who would fit that billing. There are definitely, not unimportant characters and things who are like, but they tend to fall into like a tropey, like
nerd boy,
nerd character thing where they're like, And again, they're usually not the main character. They're like a side, which to be fair, Hermione's not the main character, but they're like a sidekick who is the nerdy one who reads or whatever. So I think that's a character trope, but I will say that off the top of my head, nothing's jumping to mind. But I think if I thought for a little while, I could think of something.
Off the top of my head, the only one that I could come up with was Klaus Baudelaire from A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Yeah.
Which, I get there's like 3 main characters.
Yeah, he's
one of the main characters. Yeah. But again, what I think is interesting about that example is that whereas these female characters who are portrayed as readers are often portrayed as being interested in fiction.
I just thought sorry.
His thing is more like nonfiction.
Yeah. I just thought of a really good example.
Okay.
And you're going to kick yourself for not having thought of this. Sebastian from The Neverending Story.
Okay, fair. Yeah.
That's his whole character is that, yeah. He's like a story guy. Yeah. And he's the main character and he's not.
Yeah, he's the main character. Yeah. So coming off of that, in current times, where we are right now, we have this idea that girls are predisposed to like reading.
Real quick, he is picked on for that.
Yes, he is.
And usually the female characters are not generally as picked. I guess to be fair, Hermione is.
But I think they're picked on in a different... We're going way off the rails
sorry,
here.
I didn't mean to go too far off the rails.
I think they're picked on in a different way, though, and I think it all connects because Hermione is picked on for being a drudge.
Yes.
Whereas a character like Sebastian, like he's picked on for not being stereotypically masculine.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
In the books.
They are different. Yeah.
And then reasons. Movie 2, he's somehow a swimming star. But
well, he's not because he can't dive off the diving board. But
whatever.
This is not
okay, where was I? Okay, so we're here in the present now. What we have then is this idea that girls are predisposed to like reading and boys are not. So then the powers that be, the gatekeepers, namely parents, teachers, and librarians, push to try and get boys reading. And then we arrive at our second stereotyped assumption. Boys like to read about boys and boy things. They don't like to read girly books, which is interpreted as anything from books about girl stuff, princesses, romance, feelings, etc., to any book with a female protagonist.
Yes, true.
And like many other elements of our modern lives that are dictated by the gender binary, these quote-unquote rules are much more rigid for boys than they are for girls. Boy books are assumed to be universal, while girl books are just for girls, which is why I read Harry Potter, but you didn't read Anne of Green Gables.
Yes.
And let me be clear here, this does not always look like an irate parent snatching a pink book out of their son's hand. It can look like that.
Right.
But in most cases, it's a lot more subtle because this idea is now very ingrained into our collective subconscious. I think even a progressive librarian, teacher, or parent is more likely to just unthinkingly recommend a book with a male protagonist to a boy than a book with a female protagonist.
I agree. So I read books primarily... I read a lot as a kid. It was something my parents encouraged me to do a lot. It's a thing that I liked doing a lot, and I read a bunch as a kid. I can't recall a single book I read with a female protagonist. I'm sure I did. I'm sure there was a few. But that being said, my parents are incredibly progressive people for their especially for their age. Like, they are incredibly progressive people, and it was not a matter of like there was no in sort of weird gender enforcement or anything like that. It was mere because a lot of times, and in fact, a lot of the books I read didn't have anything to do with what my parents getting them for me. They got me a lot of books, but there was also I got a lot of them through school, through the library, through teachers, through book book fairs, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. And I think part of it was, too, I also just, and obviously enforced by society, I think I generally just gravitated towards male protagonist books, probably, if I had to guess. But, yeah, my point being that my reading upbringing was one where I primarily read books with male protagonists, but it was not something, at least to me, that remotely seemed like it was consciously enforced.
Yeah.
Is my point.
No, and like I said, I think most of the time it's not.
Yeah.
It's something that is just so ingrained into our society now. I mean, you mentioned like book fairs and stuff, but I can remember getting like the weekly Scholastic catalogs in elementary school, and there was almost always a section that was books for boys.
Right. Yeah.
Books for girls.
Absolutely.
And that kind of thing leads you, especially a child. You know, impressionable kids.
Yeah.
And I had, kind of a similar literary upbringing to you. I mean, I read all across the board. Boy books, girl books, all the books. I was very fortunate to grow up my formative years in a home that very much valued books and reading and literacy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I read all kinds of different protagonists.
Yeah.
And never thought anything of it.
I will say the closest I guess I got, that the one that I can think of that I know had a female protagonist, but it was I don't know if they were twins, but it was a brother-sister protagonist pair, the Magic Treehouse books. Have it's a boy and a girl are like the protagonists. And I was obsessed with those books when I was a little kid. I read dozens and dozens of them. But that was the only one that jumped into my head. Yeah. Anyways.
So, what's the problem here? If the boys are reading, is there really an issue? And the answer is yes and no, but mostly yes. All children should read and be read to. You will never get me to come off that line. That is maybe the one thing in my life that I believe the most fervently.
Should read and or be read to, yeah.
Yes. And all children should be able to read what interests them, regardless of genre, format, or the gender of the protagonist. The trouble starts when adults start making assumptions and voicing them. So one of the articles that I read while doing research for this segment was a Washington Post piece from 2018 by author Shannon Hale, who's most well known for her children's series, The Princess Academy. Guess what kind of book that is?
Gladiatorial combat in ancient Rome.
Girl book or boy book?
I'm going to go with that's a girl book.
Girl book. It's got the word princess in the title, so... and she relayed a story about being introduced before speaking at a school by the school librarian, who said, "Girls, you're in for a real treat. You will love Shannon Hale's books. Boys, I expect you to behave anyway." So what are we teaching boys when we're casually dismissive of girls' stories and female protagonists? Like, the message is that girls' stories, girls' interests, and girls themselves are lesser. That boys can't and shouldn't admire and identify with female protagonists. That there's nothing of value to be found in reading about a girl's perspective on the world. And that has side effects that last long past childhood.
A teenager leaves home to visit his father for the summer.
Now you're a pilot.
When over the Canadian Rockies, the pilot suffers a heart attack. Here, Brian Robeson must confront the wilderness and himself with nothing but a hatchet.
Hatchet is a 1986 young adult wilderness survival novel by American writer Gary Paulsen. Gary Paulsen has authored over 200 books and more than 200 other articles, short stories, and plays, all primarily targeted for young teenagers. In 1997, he won the Margaret Edwards Award from the American Library Association for his lifetime contribution to writing for teens. Okay, so this following information, I actually didn't find a ton of stuff about Hatchet itself. There is stuff out there. There's a whole book that I'm going to mention here that's about Hatchet, that if you're really interested in it, you can go read that. But Gary Paulson, we're not doing a learning things on Gary Paulson, so I thought I'd be interested to kind of cover some of his story here because some of this stuff is wild. The following information is from Gary Paulson's autobiographical works, of which there are several, including Easter Sun and Winter Moon, an autobiographical odyssey.
Wow. That's a title.
Yeah, Winter Moon. Well, Easter... I believe that those are two. I believe Easter Sun is one.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. It's Easter Sun and Winter Moon, an autobiographical odyssey. Those are two.
An autobiographical odyssey, though,
Yes.
is, wow, chef's kiss.
It seems as if these are true. I don't know. Gary Paulson is a very, secluded, kind of he just lives. He's lives his life. We'll talk about what he does, but he's a very sort of secluded person, and much about his life seems to not be known other than what he said about it. And it seems like maybe it's not all true. I don't know.
No, that's the way to do it, though.
Yeah.
Control the narrative.
Yeah, he definitely has control of the narrative of his life. I will say that much. So, apparently, on one occasion when he was very young, his mother was napping, and we'll get into this. His mother was an alcoholic. Both of his parents were alcoholics. His mother was napping. Gary Paulson snuck outside and was apparently snatched up by a child molester. But his mother showed up just in the nick of time to save him and then proceeded to beat the man to death. I don't... That's a story that he related. He then went on another story. He also reported that so his father... Although he's not sure who his actual father is because he related stories that his mother was in lots of relationships and was not ever was not particularly monogamous. At one point after World War II, he was on a naval trip to the Philippines to visit his father, who had been stationed there after the war. And while they were traveling on this boat, they saw a plane crash into the ocean. And they were sitting there, and during the rescue operation, they were trying to get all these people that had survived this plane crash. He watched as many of these people were eaten by sharks. And then afterwards, the survivors that made it onto the ship, his mother was she had some sort of nursing experience. And he helped his mom care for all these injured survivors of this plane crash. Supposedly. Again, this all sounds fake. I don't know. These are from his autobiographies and from a specific book that I'm going to mention right now. The book is called Guts, The True Stories Behind Hatchet and the Bryan Books, which is another author wrote an investigation into Gary Paulson and his writing of Hatchet and on all of the Bryan books. He in that book, Gary Paulson, and this author interviewed Gary Paulson for it, apparently. Gary Paulson discusses how he survived between the ages of 12 and 14 in Minnesota. At this time, both of his parents were alcoholics and so dysfunctional that he literally didn't even provide food for him. So he ended up getting a job, several jobs, one as a pin setter at a bowling alley, another as a newspaper delivery boy, and then another as a farmhand. And he used that money to buy a .22 rifle, and then he would use that to hunt for sustenance because his parents literally were, so dysfunctionally alcoholic that they were not providing food for him. Eventually, he claimed to have given up on the rifle and manufactured his own bow and arrows to hunt deer with. Look, here's the thing.
I feel like Gary Paulson is having fun with us.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know.
Look, my dad grew up around, my dad's a little younger than Gary Paulson. Gary Paulson's 82 currently. So my dad's a decade younger than him. Mm-hmm. But the stories my dad tells me about his childhood, none of this seems particularly it's outlandish, but also things that happened to kids back then were and still do, to be fair. But just It actually doesn't. It seems outlandish, but I'm like, I can actually buy this. If half the shit my dad tells me is true that they got up to when they were kids, I was like, sure, this tracks. Like, yeah. So much of what is known about Gary Paulson's life is revealed in prologues and epilogues of his own books. In his book, The Quilt, one of a series of 3 books based on summers that he spent with his grandmother, Paulson told about the tremendous influence that his grandmother had on his life. It's difficult to say how factual of an autobiography The Quill is intended to be, as Paulson is supposed to have been 6 years old in the story, and that he made references to events found in Easter Sun, which is supposed to have been set later. He also refers to himself in this book in third person and only as the boy. So again, this all lends credence to the idea that I think some of what we do or don't know about Gary Paulson's life is maybe not, it's a little like...
Gary Paulson's out here like doing his own therapy through writing, like
yes, that, but also like you said, very much controlling his own narrative.
Yes,
and he existed at a time where pre-internet, any of this stuff, where if you can't track down people that knew him when he was a kid or whatever, he gets to tell his own story. Yeah. So who knows how much or how little of this is accurate? I'm not calling him a liar. I'm just saying. Things that lend credence to the potentiality of these stories about his childhood are things like this. In 1983, Gary Paulson entered the 1,150-mile Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race. He placed 41st out of 54 finishers. I didn't see how many people like started and didn't finish, but he did finish it, which is an accomplishment in all of itself. His official time was 17 days, 12 hours, 38 minutes, and 38 seconds. Gary Paulson still maintains a 40-acre plot of land near Willow, Alaska, where he breeds and trains sled dogs for the Iditarod. He kept wanting to do the Iditarod again, but he had heart disease at one point, and it kept him from doing it. And he's never done it again. He withdrew as a contestant in like 2003. Like he was slated to do it in like the 2000s, and then something like his heart disease or something, he wasn't able to. But he so he's apparently still training sled dogs in Alaska. That being said, I don't know when this exact piece of information is from. He's 82 now. I don't know if he's still training sled dogs. Alive? He is still alive. Yes, Gary Paulson is still alive. But I don't know it, or he's not reported dead yet. Is how I'll say it. Knowing the way he lives, like he lives in the middle of nowhere in Alaska.
I'm really upset that I can never meet this guy.
Yeah, he's a wild dude, I'm sure. Interesting fellow, but so 82 again, not reported dead yet. But my guess is that maybe he's still not training sled dogs. Or maybe he is. Who knows? Who knows? So, back to Hatchet now a little bit. Hatchet was the runner-up for the 1988 Newbery Award, getting the Newbery honor as opposed to the Newbery Award. And it also spawned 4 sequels, which I mentioned earlier, including The River, Brian's Winter, Brian's Return, and Brian's Hunt. And like I said earlier, I've read all of them but Brian's Hunt. At least I don't recall reading Brian's Hunt. It came out in like 2000 or something like that, and I don't recall reading it. I read The River, meh. Brian's Winter, I remember liking a lot, and Brian's Return was okay. The River is interesting. The River is we'll never do any of them, so I'll just talk briefly. The River is, after he escapes at the end of Hatchet, spoilers, he goes back with a survival guy who wants to like learn from him and like document it all. Like he's like, let's go and we'll learn about all this stuff. And he ends up getting the survival guy that he's like showing how he survived to. It gets struck by lightning and falls into a coma. Yeah.
So now he has to survive again.
Yeah, and the reason it's called The River is he ends up building a raft. And because he knows where they are, and they're in the middle of nowhere, they got dropped off by a plane. He has no way to contact anybody, but he knows if he can get down the river, he can get to a city. And so he builds a raft, and it's
always follow a river. Yeah,
it's about going down this river in the raft with this comatose guy. Brian's Winter is the one I like the most from my memory of the sequels I've read. It's a alternative and it's like an alternative timeline essentially where Brian doesn't get rescued at the end of Hatchet and has to survive through the winter.
Interesting.
So that, it's like an alternative history version of Hatchet where he has to survive through the winter. Brian's return is where it's literally what it says it is. He goes home. I think it follows on from the winter. Technically, I can't remember. I don't know which of those two, like, if it's the river or the winter, like, timeline.
This is the Brian expanded universe.
Yeah, because there are two timelines in this in this book series, which is interesting. And I don't remember. I think Brian's return is from the river timeline. I can't recall. But he basically ends up realizing he doesn't fit into society anymore and just like goes back to live in the woods for a while. Yeah,
relatable.
Yeah. And then I haven't read Brian's.
Did you like these books because you share a name with the protagonist?
No.
That was not part of the draw for you?
No, because I don't share a name.
Well, no,
protagonist.
It's spelled differently.
Spelled dumb.
I think your name actually is
mine is spelled the cool way. The I is dumb. The I looks way dumber. Look, this is one hill I'll die on. The way Brian looks, just all of them go up. Bryan has some interesting, like you got the whatever.
It's visually interesting.
Yeah, it's visually interesting because like B and R go up above the like.
But then the Y goes down.
Then the Y goes down. It's like more. It's just more interesting.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Like I like letters that have words that have like both like
I'm just saying. I'm pretty sure the Y spelling is like
it's much more
variant.
Yeah, it is
off of the I spelling.
Absolutely, it is it is the alternative to the for sure. I just think it's more interesting. I think it looks cooler.
You're not biased.
I'm not biased at all. So this book, interestingly, has very polarizing reviews on Goodreads. And I just wanted to, it's got like a 3.5 out of 5. It's
a lot of books on Goodreads are like in that range.
But the top review that I read on Goodreads from 2009 has 491 likes. It's a 1-star review, and it reads thusly.
I'm so excited.
Though the story was compelling, very compelling enough that I finished it despite the compelling urge to throw it out the window, I don't think I could ever read it again. The window, the shiny window, the shiny open window was very tempting. This book was so repetitious. Why so repetitious? I know not why this book was so repetitious, but the repetitions made me want to pull my hair out. My brown hair, the brown hair on my head, the hair that was brown that was on my head. I did listen to it on CD, which might have been part of the problem. Bruce said he didn't, and I assume Bruce is this person's like partner, friend, something, whatever. Bruce said he didn't notice it as much when he read the book, but when you read it, your mind kind of skips over things that might be repetitious. The repetitious things might have been skipped over that might make you want to pull your hair out and throw the book out of the window. So, that's the end of the review.
That's a great review.
Great review. 491 likes. I think it's got a lot of those likes are just because it's a good review.
Yeah.
But I didn't recall this book being repetitious in its language, but I read it as a child, so I may have been misremembering. I did just start it. Yeah. I am 4 or 5 chapters in. There is repetition, but I'm going to defend it in the episode.
Okay.
I think that it's very not excited. Like just bad writing. It's very intentional.
Have a purpose.
It's very purposeful. Okay. And, like, I guess I can understand somebody reading it and finding it annoying, but also, to me, it feels like it has a purpose and it feels like it fits and makes sense. Mm-hmm. And we'll discuss that in the main episode and why I feel that way.
Okay, all right.
But I did get what they were saying, again, within the first couple chapters. I was like, okay, I see what they're saying. But it's not as bad as they're saying, at least so far. But I get it. But they're wrong. So some other Gary Paulson books, I just wanted to mention this, that I have fond memories of, because this is the only book of his, at least that I know of, that has been made into a movie, so it's the only one we'll ever get to talk about. I mentioned him earlier, but Dog Song is about a kid in Alaska, I believe, that goes off into the wilderness, and there are dogs. Mm-hmm. Influenced by the Iditarod thing, I think. Canyons, which I remember very little about, but I read that a couple times. And the one that I liked the most when I was a kid, other than Hatchet, is one called the Transall Saga, which never got any sequels, but I was disappointed about. Where in that one, a kid is hiking through, I think, like the Arizona, somewhere in the West, like the mountains, like deserty mountain areas, and ends up getting sucked. That one actually kind of merges sci-fi. He gets sucked up by a blue beam of light.
What?
Or I say sucked up. He gets hit by a blue beam of light that transports him, and it's a spoiler, into the future, like way into the future. And he ends up in this post-apocalyptic society that is, it's reverted into like a tribal, like Bronze Age type world.
Interesting.
And he like starts working with these, but he ends up finding these little, it has kind of like Planet of the Apes type of vibes, where it's like clearly this is, he doesn't know at first if he's been transported somewhere or if what's happened, and then he finds like a Coke bottle at one point. He's like, oh, this is Earth in the future, blah blah blah, and then he eventually figures out what happened that led to this apocalypse and or led to this, cataclysmic events, and then when he gets eventually voiped back, and he like lives a whole lifetime essentially. And gets in relationships and blah, blah, blah. And then eventually he gets hit with a blue beam of light randomly again at the end, and then gets teleported back to the exact moment where he... It's cool. I liked that book as a kid a lot. It's kind of combined the wilderness survival with the sci-fi.
There,
yeah. And then added in some weird meta, like time travel stuff. All of it. It hit a lot of my niches of stories that I like. So if you're interested in... if you like Hatchet, I would recommend checking out the Transall saga. I have no idea how any of these hold up. It's been, like I said, I read these all when I was 12 or whatever, 10. So, all right, now it's time to find out a little bit about A Cry in the Wild.
Concord Pictures presents Jared Rushton, A Cry in the Wild, based on the Newbery Award-winning #1 bestseller, Hatchet. The Los Angeles Times called it splendid.
Keep away from my berries, pal.
The Chicago Sun-Times called it fascinating. A realistic adventure story to savor.
No!
And the San Francisco Chronicle hailed it as the best boy against nature story since My Side of the Mountain.
A Cry in the Wild is a 1990 coming-of-age survival drama film based on the book Hatchet. Some sources said loosely based. It was directed by Mark Griffiths, who also directed a boatload of mostly TV movies that I'd never heard of, from the mid-'80s to the mid-2010s. The only thing on his credit list that I recognized off the top of my head was Beethoven's Fifth. The fifth,
like the
fifth
Beethoven movies?
Yeah,
Okay.
with the Saint Bernard, yes.
Yeah.
It was written by Catherine Cyran, I don't know, whose other writing credits are mostly like Hallmark Christmas movies.
Nice.
Gary Paulson also has a writing credit, but I honestly couldn't tell if it was just for the novel or if he helped with the screenplay.
I looked at IMDb afterward, and who knows if it's accurate, but IMDb had him listed both for a screenplay credit and for novel by credit, which usually means that they did help with the screenplay. But who knows? I didn't see anything else about that anywhere else. Like I never.
Yeah, that was where I
that
was
the
tripping
only
up. I was
place
like, I
saw
can't
that
find
information.
anything verifying this.
Yeah, I didn't see anything on his page. Like I went through his Wikipedia and stuff. I didn't see anything about him working on the movie other than just a little note that said Hatchet was adapted into a movie. But he does on IMDb have 2 credits, and one of them is screenplay, which implies that he was involved, but maybe not. Who knows?
The film stars Jared Rushton as the main character, Brian. Rushton hasn't appeared in anything since 2000, but was in a handful of late 80s classics, including Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Big, and Overboard. He also appeared in the original run of Roseanne as Chip Lang.
Yeah, I recognized him when I saw this from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. He's one of the neighbor boys.
The film also stars Ned Beatty, Pamela Sue Martin, Stephen Meadows, Terrence H. Winkless, and a handful of other actors whose names I didn't recognize. Although when I was clicking on them to see if I knew them from other stuff, Terrence H. Winkless directed the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
The TV?
yeah,
the movie?
the TV show.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Good for him.
The animal actor, I couldn't find if it was an actual wolf or if it was like a wolf like dog or what. But the animal actor that appears in this film was named Stormcloud and also appeared in White Fang 2, Myth of the White Wolf.
I have a feeling that this is going to be a big change. Whatever this animal actor.
This animal actor?
I don't think
gonna be a change.
That's not from the book. And it also ties into why I think they maybe changed the title. I had this discussion with a coworker who listens to the podcast who was talking about how we were like, why would they? Because they had read Hatchet as a kid. And
because Hatchet is
it's such a good name.
It's a good name, and it's a fairly well known.
It was a fairly well known book.
Yeah, it's a fairly well known book.
And I was like, why would they change the name?
But you think they changed it?
I think
enough?
they changed it because no. I think the reason they changed it, and I think having this potential wolf friend in the movie or dog wolf friend in the movie
friend. We love a wolf
adds
friend.
in even more because there's another movie book/movie, a Jack London book called Call of the Wild.
Yes.
That has a dog and a guy.
Yes. So
and
you think they were trying to
float cash
off of
in
that.
on that with Cry in the Wild. And then maybe added in this wolf character sidekick, potential because I'm only 5 chapters in, but I read this book a lot as a child, and I would be astounded if I forgot that he has a pet wolf in this, because I'm pretty positive he does not.
Speaking of the wolf, this movie apparently has 3 sequels, and you're going to love the titles. They are White Wolves, A Cry in the Wild 2, White Wolves 2, Legend of the Wild, and White Wolves 3, Cry of the White Wolf.
Oh my God. That is some Fast and Furious
Right?
naming conventions going on there. White Wolves, A Cry in the Wild 2. White Wolves 2, Legend of the Wild. White Wolves 3, Cry of the White Wolf. Wild.
So this film was originally released in 1990. On September of 1991, it aired for the first time on television in the U.S. It aired on PBS as part of a series Wonderworks. This movie has a 5.6 on IMDb and 39% on Rotten Tomatoes. Could not find it on Metacritic.
Not the only place you can't find it.
So IMDb listed a couple of goofs that are apparently in this movie, so we can watch out for those. The first one, when Brian first flees from the mosquitoes and takes refuge under a log, the shadow of a boom mic can be seen sweeping across the lower right of the screen. So you can be on the lookout for that. And 51 minutes into the film, when the bear walks past Brian's camp at night, an inverted reflection of the campfire appears, rising up and then floating in midair at center screen.
That might not be a goof. That might just be a lens artifact. I'll have to look for it.
We'll have to look for it.
Light does weird things in camera lenses. It's not uncommon. When you see it's called bokeh or whatever. Those little weird floaty lights. When you zoom in on lights and with a zoom lens, and light lenses are lots of layers of glass and and they reflect things, and light can do really weird things in them. So I wouldn't be surprised if the floating campfire is just essentially a lens flare from the campfire. I don't know. Without seeing
I'm
it.
interested to see what this thing that's described here looks like.
To me, just being a person who knows a little bit about cameras and stuff, that sounds to me just like an artifact from the lens. That's not like a goof so much as it could be classified as a goof because you can shoot it in a way where you wouldn't have that happen, but it also could just be a way that it I don't know. We'll see.
So since you included a review in your book facts, I would have included this anyway because I like it. The top review on IMDb gave this movie a 4 out of 10 and stated, "I came away from this movie with the feeling that it could have been so much better. Instead of what should be a gripping, tense story of a boy's fight for survival in the wilderness, it comes off as a National Geographic documentary meets Columbia sportswear ad. So we have that to look forward to.
I'm fully expecting to pick the book.
Yeah.
I would be blown away if I... There's 0% chance
I'm
I'm
fully
gonna pick
expecting this to be like a
not
good, bad, or bad.
Yeah, I think it's probably be a not particularly good movie. I will say that if it comes off as a National Geographic documentary, that's not too far off from the book's vibe. Like we're not like terribly far off there. But yeah, the Columbia sportswear ad. Interesting. Katie, where can it be watched?
Nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you can check with your local library, or if you still have a video rental store. I mean, you can check. But this movie does not exist.
No.
I tried to search for it. I used the Just Watch app, and I have every single possible option selected on that. Nothing comes up. I've looked for movies on there before where it's oh, this isn't streaming anywhere. This just is not on the app. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
We were able to find a copy on YouTube.
Which is the only reason we're doing this.
Yeah.
If we had not found that copy on YouTube,
we would have redirected.
Yeah.
And we will share that on Facebook, Twitter, and on our Patreon. So if you want to watch along with us, head over there. What I will do, I'll post it on its own, but I will also post it as a comment replying to the prequel episode, which I always pin at the top of our page on Facebook and Twitter, so you should be able to find it pretty easily.
It's also available to buy on DVD on Amazon. I actually ordered us a copy because I started looking at the YouTube version. I don't want to put people off from watching the YouTube version, but it's not great quality.
Yeah.
It's watchable, but the sound is kind of mixed weird, and since we watch it together, I think it would be easier to watch with headphones.
Okay.
On a computer, even still, you're getting some sound in one ear and other sound in the other ear. It's a little annoying, but it's watchable. I want to say it's not unwatchable on YouTube, but you can get it for $12 on DVD on Amazon, which is what I did, just because I knew I'd get it by this weekend so we could watch it. So too late for you, unfortunately. But it is available on Amazon. I think it was Amazon. Yeah, and I think it was Prime. I think I got it. I think it's supposed to be here tomorrow. But anyway, so it's also available there. But yeah, watch it on YouTube. It's just, since we watch it on a TV and stuff, I was I'm just going to order the DVD. It's $10.
And, if you do happen to find it streaming anywhere, especially if you're outside the U.S., because it's hard for us to search, just let us know. And we can share that information.
Yeah.
But do look for A Cry in the Wild.
Yes.
Because there's another movie called Cry in the Wild that is not the same thing.
Yeah. Again, I think they changed the name for that dumb Call in the Wild, a Call of the Wild or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's so stupid. Hatchet, it's the only thing called Hatchet.
Yeah. It's a great title.
It's a great title. You don't know. It's just oof. Gets right to the point. So dumb. Anyways. All right, that's going to do it for this prequel episode. We thank you once again for joining us on this adventure as we learned a little bit and talked a little bit about Hatchet / A Cry in the Wild. We'll be back in 1 week's time to discuss Hatchet / A Cry in the Wild. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.